They did it behind your back because they believed that's where you belonged. Silent, blind, powerless. Their actions were not spontaneous eruptions of cruelty. They were rehearsed betrayals designed to strike when your gaze was turned elsewhere. That's how cowards operate. In rooms you weren't invited to, with mouths that spoke with certainty while hearts dripped envy. They laid their plans like snakes coil around warmth, slow, subtle, venomous. But what they forgot is that nothing burns brighter than the truth told with composure. And when you replied, calmly, devastatingly, without theatrics, it shattered more than just their script. It shattered the illusion they had sold to everyone who once stood beside them. The reply wasn't a scream. It wasn't a threat. It didn't arrive dressed in vengeance. It arrived with silence, so sharp it sliced the air clean. You spoke a truth so precise, so detailed, so heartbreakingly accurate, that it peeled the mask off their face in front of everyone they once fooled. And suddenly, the people who laughed with them nodded at their lies, co-signed their delusions. They paused. They looked again, and this time they saw what they had refused to see before. It wasn't your fury that changed the room. It was your clarity. And when clarity walks into a room filled with manipulation, it's not loud. It just turns the lights on. They had crafted their story carefully. You were the antagonist, the unstable one, the one who couldn't let go, couldn't grow, couldn't move on. They needed you to be bitter because it justified their betrayal. But your response betrayed none of that. It was surgical, poised, and worst of all, it was kind. You didn't stoop, you didn't claw. You simply revealed, and that made them rot. Because when someone tells the truth without spite, it hits harder than any insult. You gave them nothing to weaponize. No outrage, no tantrum, just honesty so undeniable that even their closest supporters had to pause and ask, wait, what kind of person does it to someone who replies with that much grace? Psychologically, people are drawn to the composed, to those who hold their ground without becoming the ground. When you didn't mirror their chaos, you became the contrast. And in that contrast, they lost their image, their circle. The same people who applauded them when the rumors flew began to question everything. That's the danger of betrayal, and it doesn't need exposure. It simply needs the victim to rise without venom. You didn't argue. You didn't beg to be believed. You didn't attempt to prove anything. You just spoke. And in doing so, you let the crowd decide. And the crowd turned, quietly, sharply. They began to disown them, one by one, not because you asked them to, but because something inside them whispered, this doesn't look like betrayal anymore. It looks like cowardice. They thought they buried you. In whispers, in jokes, in exaggerated tales told behind your back to make themselves look noble. But you weren't buried. You were planted, and the version of you that emerged had roots too deep to be moved. You became immovable, untouchable. Their people, the ones they used to triangulate your downfall, started to leave them. Not dramatically, but decisively. Because betrayal is a contagious rot, and once people saw the proof of who really carried the disease, they refused to sit at that table again. You didn't need to retaliate. They exiled themselves. Your reply wasn't a clapback. It was a mirror, and they couldn't survive their own reflection. The psychology of your power lies in what you didn't do. You didn't spiral. You didn't slander. You stood still while the storm they created swallowed itself. You gave them the dignity they never gave you. And that made their people uncomfortable. Because humans, at their core, can sense integrity. They may laugh at the lie for a moment, but they'll sit with the truth forever. Your response forced everyone to sit. And what they saw wasn't someone seeking revenge. It was someone who transcended the situation entirely. And in that transcendence, you weren't just absolved. You were vindicated. They had designed their version of events with the expectation that you would implode. They needed a reaction to justify their betrayal. But when you didn't flinch, when you responded with full awareness, yet no bitterness, you broke their narrative. Your poise became the wrecking ball. You didn't need to fight them. You just showed up as yourself, fully formed, fully aware. And that terrified them. because it meant you were never the version of you they tried to sell. It meant you had always been the higher standard, and that they were the ones performing beneath their own shadow. People don't disown someone without reason. They do it when something feels undeniably wrong, when the cracks in someone's story become too wide to ignore. Your response didn't create those cracks. It illuminated them. That's the danger of calm truth. It's an X-ray. It shows the fractures hidden beneath the makeup. Their followers, their confidence, their enablers. They began to see those fractures. And slowly, they started walking away. Because once people see a snake, they don't unsee it. They step back, even if they cheered for it once. You gave them a reason to step back. Not with vengeance, but with vision. They wear skin that is not their own. They dress their intentions in borrowed empathy, smile with teeth too polished to be sincere, and speak with a cadence that mimics compassion, but never carries the soul of it. Manipulators do not seek connection. They seek control. They masquerade as loyal friends, devoted partners, selfless advisors. But their true craving lies beneath it all: dominance through deception. They do not build, they rearrange, twist perception, rewrite events. Their world exists only when they can control yours. And that is why exposure is death to them. It doesn't wound their ego. It erases their identity. Because once you see through the facade, once you name what they are, they vanish. Not physically, psychologically. Their illusion collapses. And you expose them. You exposed them with silence at first. That's what shook them. They baited you with provocations, expected the firestorm, but you gave them no reaction, just presence, just poise. And when you finally spoke, it wasn't to retaliate, it was to reveal. You didn't describe what they did. You didn't scream about what they broke. You simply turned the lights on. Let the evidence speak for itself. And the moment your words began to unravel their design, they knew the end had arrived. Because a manipulator survives by curating who they are in each room. And you shattered all of that with one thing they never anticipated: consistency. The version of you behind closed doors matched the one in public. The version of them, splintered, contradictory, built on lies stacked too high to survive a breeze. And you didn't blow, you breathed. You breathed truth, and it crushed them. Understand this. Manipulators are shapeshifters not because they are flexible, but because they are afraid. Afraid of stillness. Afraid of being seen for more than 5 seconds by someone who doesn't need their charm to feel safe. That's what makes you dangerous. You don't need them. You never did. They saw it. You didn't. Not yet. But once you awakened, once your vision sharpened and your tolerance eroded, they felt it. The shifting, the unmasking, and they panicked. Because once a manipulator is no longer in control of how others see them, they rot in the truth. They cannot survive in exposure. That is the psychological oxygen they suffocate without. You took it away, and they felt the noose tighten, not from vengeance, but from consequence. They don't panic when you fight them. They expect that. It's in the plan. They plan for outrage. They thrive in chaos because it allows them to reframe, retell, remanipulate. But what they cannot survive is your clarity. When you speak without rage, when your tone holds no venom, only precision. That's the scalpel. Because now you're not the enemy in their fantasy. You are the mirror. And no manipulator can survive being mirrored. Their entire existence relies on misdirection. So when you stand still, unflinching, naming every move they made like chess pieces on a war table, you annihilate their camouflage. And that is a psychological death sentence to someone who builds identity on distortion. They crave control because that's where they live, in the perception of others. They do not build selves. They harvest reactions. They shape-shift in social environments, not for acceptance, but for manipulation. Their reflection depends on the beliefs of others. So when you tell the truth, when you offer receipts, memories, patterns, psychological breakdowns of their exact behaviors, you kill every version of them they planted in other people's minds. And that is spiritual homicide to them. You didn't just outsmart them, you erased their masks from the shelves, one by one. And now they walk through rooms naked, exposed, waiting for someone to point and say, You're not who you said you were. Exposure is death because it turns the manipulator into what they fear most in irrelevant. Without the ability to shape how others perceive them, they decay. Their charisma was a script. Their kindness was a currency. Their empathy was investment. And you ruined the return. You spoke without screaming, and every person who ever doubted your instinct began to remember the strange moments. The tone shifts, the inconsistent stories, the private insults disguised as jokes. And suddenly you weren't the one under question. They were. That's what they cannot recover from. Not the exposure itself. The aftermath. The silence in rooms that once applauded. The side eyes. The text messages that never return. You didn't strip them of status. You handed them a mirror, and it shattered everything they ever built. You weren't just their target. You were their stage. They performed on you. Their credibility rested on your silence. So the moment you became articulate, the moment your pain evolved into eloquence, the entire framework collapsed. You didn't outlasted them. And in the end, all that remained was the truth. Steady, unforgiving, elegant. You didn't break their mask with fists. You made it irrelevant. People no longer asked who was right. They asked, how did I not see it? That's worse than exposure. That's exile. You exiled them from their fantasy by making it impossible to go back. Because the truth, once seen, doesn't fade. It haunts. Their desperation was never about you. It was about keeping control over their character. And now that control is gone. You tore it away not through revenge, but through revelation. And now, they walk around trying to sew new masks, only to find no faces left to wear them for. That is the end of the manipulator. Not when they are destroyed, but when they are ignored. You no longer serve as their excuse. You no longer orbit their story. You are the author of your own. And in your story, they are nothing more than a chapter titled Warning. So don't look back. Let them decay in the absence of your attention. That's the final cut. You exposed them. You ended the myth. You survived what was designed to break you. And you spoke like a god wearing a mortal's disguise. That's what terrifies them now. You weren't emotional. You were forensic. You weren't lashing out. You were documenting. And now, they no longer exist in the light they once borrowed. You took the power they stole and turned it into your platform. You didn't just expose them. You replaced them as the source, as the reference, as the voice no one dares to question. They craved control, but you gave them exposure. And that was the death they never planned for.